Hey guys, I'm back at it again. It is absolutely insane that I'm finally doing Sly Cooper 4. Now, this is a game that I've always had the thought of I will play someday, and this someday has finally come. It's also insane that this game, as of this recording in 2023, came out in 2013, and I was there to witness it coming out. My God. 10 whole years. That is just, man, a lot of shit has gone on through that time. Nevertheless, let's go ahead and get right into that origin. One thing I can say about this game is that it's not a very happy one in terms of its origin. It is very interesting to actually see and think about. You should honestly look this up after this, since I will only go into talking about it rather than actually showing you. There is some actual footage still on YouTube. Since our games did have a chance to make Sly 4, but they actually had to make the trilogy of Sly Cooper come to HD. They had to prove themselves to Sony before even that, with a prototype of Sly Cooper 4, which this is a very different version of what we actually got. Apparently, it's going to be more in lines of an online based game, meaning it was going to be for the PS Vita, where you can make your own base and have traps to defend other people from getting your stuff, referencing the whole Sly games with how they only steal from thieves. As well as in my mind, I can only compare it to what I would think is a Clash of Clans type game. Now, since the PS Vita wasn't really that good and didn't really sell that well, this is ultimately cancelled. So after making the HD trilogy, they were on their way to make Sly Cooper 4. Now, this is where I'll stop with the origin, because it would make a lot more sense to actually tell you the rest about it once I get after the story. So I'm not sure they actually say how much time has passed since the Sly Cooper 3 game, but it picks up, I would say, a good bit after the fact, with Sly still pretending to have amnesia while dating Carmelita, and basically having the time of his life, while Bentley does the same, until one day Penelope actually disappears, and he also notices that the Thievius Raccoonus ancient text is also disappearing along with it. After seeing this, Bentley decides it's finally time to get everyone back together one more time. Shortly after this, Murray's the first one to get picked up. We also see that he's also doing a little bit of racing on the side. He gladly gives it up to see Bentley though. And he also picks up Sly, which, funny enough, Sly was actually going to do a similar heist to a museum that they were soon going to hit. As they make way to the art museum, so he can grab this one item to help him actually go back in time. Before Sly is actually able to grab it, Carmelita storms in. Now, just to branch off for a second, they gave her a slight redesign, and I just absolutely hate this. They ditched her iconic police uniform and gave her this more sexy look, and honestly, it's very off-putting for me. I'm not really sure why they did this, why they felt the need to make her more sexy, because in my opinion, she was already sexy in the previous 3 games. At this point, it just feels like they're trying way too hard, especially when she has a new voice actor. And me being Hispanic, I can't help but think of my grandma or mom when she starts talking to me. It's just because of her accent, I swear to God. If anybody else is Hispanic, tell me that you also feel the same. After this, they go to different points in time, helping out whichever ancestor they need help with, and succeeding with them until it's time to actually fight the final boss in said area, and they ultimately lose that ancestor's cane for whatever reason. One of the final bosses is actually Penelope. Almost seems to be forgotten in the story, not being mentioned at all until her actual boss fight, which is in the 4th episode. So more than halfway of the game, they have yet to even mention her by name. And they decide to make her evil. Now, this would be okay if they actually had a good reason, but the reason they actually give is very stupid. It comes out of nowhere. It's very out of character for her, but basically, she just wants money, and she always views that Bentley is a little good boy and never actually does anything evil because of Sly. And this comes off horrible because she never once showed an interest in this at all, even in the third game. In fact, there's multiple times where she'd rather have been a good guy than a bad guy, along with only really caring about working with the best, which in this case was Bentley with his smartness. But even then, she still liked to be with him just because he was Bentley. It just feels like all of her character development was just thrown out the window just to make her a quick baddie, when it could have been literally anywhere else, whether it's a new character, even a reoccurring one. The fact they still chose Penelope is something I'll never actually figure out myself, and it actually makes me wonder why. And I would love to talk to developers and actually ask them why they decided to choose Penelope and what was the reasoning behind making her evil and all this stuff. And I'm not the only one who actually thought this was a horrible choice. The majority of people who actually do play this game do consider this plotline to be really bad. Controversial point in the story, which says a lot but also doesn't say a lot at the same time. Towards the end, we finally see who the big bad is. It's none other than Le Paradox, who is very much like the Cooper family, coming from a line of thieves throughout generations. And the whole reason he does this feels a little bit forced since it's a little bit half baked. His father was also a thief, obviously, and he actually planned a job to actually pin on Sly's father. But Sly's father was actually a step ahead and did the job before he can get there. And once he did finally get there, the cops were already after him, soon putting him in jail and making Le Paradox just absolutely furious. Not just Cooper, but the whole family of Cooper. After a big reunion, a big family reunion, 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 reunion. Man, that is a weird word to say. Sly finally takes him down, ending with Sly missing somewhere in some period of time, leaving with fans on a cliffhanger to this day. Now, as I was playing through the game, I realized that all the main big bads weren't really that memorable. In fact, the majority of them were just combinations of either Sly 1 villains, Sly 2 villains, or even Sly 3 villains, in terms of personality and just overall design. In fact, even now, I barely remember some of them in terms of personality and just what they look like, which is a little bit sad. And the La Paradox fight, that was probably one of the most horrible things since it's literally just a quick time event and not a very good one at that. But then again, none of the quick time events are even a good one. Now, going back with the whole Sly Cooper ancestors, you would think having them all appear in the final level would kind of lead to something more spectacular, but it ultimately doesn't. I kind of wish they do a whole Le Paradox also doing the same thing, going to different time periods and picking up his family members and have this whole big time fight. But they decide not to do that for whatever reason, since the whole game is about time travel. It feels a little bit flat and a little bit forced having all the family members actually coming into the last level. Of course, it makes sense because they have to get her cane back, but I don't know. It always felt like it was missing a little bit something. Now, going back to that cliffhanger, this is where the rest of the origin actually comes to play. So, with Sly ending up in Egypt, he was actually going to have a DLC for this game, and it was going to be part one of it. Sadly, we never got it because I'm not sure if it was actually with cell numbers, because I've heard that it actually did make a profit, or it was just because the fans didn't receive the game that well. Whatever the reason was, Sony decided that it was actually time to bench the franchise. And since it has been 10 plus years since the last one, it makes you wonder if the actual game itself is horrible. If the gameplay itself is more of a reason why this game actually never had a sequel. Since I've only actually talked about the story and I've already had a couple of problems to address. This time around, none of the guys from the previous game are even playable or let alone make an appearance. Instead, they actually are replaced with the ancestors, which are the same ones that have been talked about through Slide 1 and 3, which is a nice touch to see, but sadly, this is my biggest gripe about the game. The ancestors they introduce don't really put a lot into gameplay. They have one that can do a long jump, but it's not even that long of a jump or at all interesting. Although the second one, whose name I actually do bother remembering, and that is Kid Cooper, actually has this little bit gunplay. And I absolutely love this guy, not just for his personality, but for the third person shooter aspect, which honestly it's really solid, even better than Carmelita's, with its more fast paced and even deadlock mechanic, which is basically just a Red Dead Redemption shooting mechanic. It really adds a whole layer of fun to it, giving you a reason to actually play as his ancestor, since he does introduces something that Sly can't replicate. Sadly, he is the only one that's actually interesting. The rest, I don't have much to actually say about besides one sentence. So here we go. Bob, he's a caveman that can climb. That's about it. The night guy, all he does is launch himself in the air. The last one being my second favorite in terms of personality, but his gameplay, all he does is let you climb faster. And that's really about it for all the ancestors. I definitely do prefer Sly's old crew compared to his actual ancestors. And the fact that they are Sly's ancestors, you would expect them to be able to do some things that Sly can do and vice versa, but that's not the case. In fact, all the upgrades you actually do buy for Sly, which are pretty useful ones, his ancestors can't even perform, like, at all, making him just more of a watered down version of Sly, when in reality, it should be quite the opposite. This being on the PS3 instead of actually on the PS2 like the other trilogy, it honestly looks amazing in terms of actual. It is no secret that this game is on the PS3. It lets you know this as soon as you start the game with how the game actually looks in terms of graphic and how the game actually applies the frame rate. It's definitely night and day compared to the old trilogy. Yes, the trilogy does look nice for its system and all, but my god, just the difference in just one system. Yes, I know it's been a couple years between the actual span of the two, but man, it is just absolutely crazy how good a game can look compared to its predecessor on a previous gen. They've added little tweaks to the main game, but nothing too amazing, but some stuff actually noteworthy. For example, Sly has costumes now, which, much like his ancestors, don't actually add a whole lot. I'd rather have been something more organic for him rather than him actually swapping in and swapping out to an outfit. In fact, most of the costumes are just one trick ponies and never really evolve from that. You barely use them. Hell, even after said world that you get it from, you don't really use it after that world. Almost like they forgot it. In fact, the ancestors and the costumes felt like they just did it because, well, it's the fourth one in the franchise, so they had to make a difference somehow. Bentley also got a little bit of a makeover in terms of his hacking sections. He has three of these. The first one being a basic classic shooter, letting him have three forms. His basic form, which you only use it for keys, and that's about it. While his other form's a lot more fast paced, while also having a ricochet to his gunfire. And then the tank being slow, his range isn't that good, but being very powerful, and only being able to destroy certain obstacles. The second hacking game is basically a side scroller shooter where you're going around leveling up while destroying all the obstacles in your path. And as you level up, you get all these different abilities and shit, making you incredibly strong towards the end as long as you don't get hit. Honestly, they're a lot of fun, extremely short, but a lot of fun. My only gripe about this is that sometimes you might lose yourself into chaos, but even then, that's a little bit of added fun to it. The third one honestly was my least favorite because it has motion controls. Now, this isn't the only game that actually uses motion controls. There's a few other times where in the main missions they use it. Even in the safe openings, they somehow decide to think it was a good idea to use motion control to unlock a safe. Now, they're not extremely difficult to actually perform. It's pretty alright, but honestly, it's a little bit out of place for it. Not the worst, but something that would definitely make you roll your eyes to. This game is definitely far from perfection when compared to 1, 2, or even 3. Now, I don't think it's as bad as other people make it out to be. It's definitely not Duke Nukem Forever or even an Anthem. Far from it. I would honestly say this is an okay game, having some problems here and there, but you can truly see that Senzori Games love the Sly Cooper franchise. As soon as you start the game, you see the overall personality of the other three being right there, front and center. Sure, some of the jokes are the same ones, but even then, putting a smile on your face. Like how the references pop up here and there, the characters talk to each other, and even their dialogue and writing is honestly just as good as the previous entries. It's honestly a love letter. It's honestly a love letter from Senzara Games to Sucker Punch. Yeah, it doesn't have that good of a gameplay. It's not as good as the other three, but at least it's something. And honestly, it's a little bit sad knowing that this is their last Sly Cooper game, considering how much passion they had for the franchise. Since, as of 2020, they were actually bought out by Facebook. Now, I know it's been 10 years, and Sly Cooper might be down the drain, but I don't think so. I think it's far from it. We've seen a lot of crazy shit happen beforehand, with other games coming back either 10 or even 10 plus years. And since Sony does know that there is a fan base and hasn't actually forgotten about Sly Cooper, I do think there's a chance. And if that day does come where Sly Cooper 5 is announced, I'll be there, regardless whoever makes it. Because I am and forever will be a Sly Cooper fan. And with that, have a good morning, good night, wherever you're at. If it's your birthday, happy birthday. I hope you have a peaceful day. Until next time, where I think I'm gonna have a little bit of a break until I actually do my next project. I was thinking about grabbing a few bananas and throwing some barrels though.